Hello. So now it's time to look at a lovely function which I use a lot called off, O-F-F. This I realised in traditional Western music is called, makes what is called a canon. So let's jump into the worksheet. Here we are. So off is a function which takes 3 inputs. It might help some of you to look at the type. So let's see. It might confuse others of you if you haven't started getting your head around types yet. Actually, it's not important to get your head around types at all, but it is another way into understanding what's going on. So let's have a quick look. So this says off is a function that takes a pattern of time as input. That's this. It takes another function as its second input, a function that takes a pattern as input and gives a pattern as output. And then its third input is a pattern. And then this is the output, a new pattern. So let's look at that in practice. Let's start with 2 notes, a C and an E. And let's try this with the off. So here's that first input, which is a pattern of time. By a pattern of time, that means that it can be expressed as mininotation, or it can be something that is the outcome of some other function manipulations. But it also means you can just specify it as a simple number. And in this case, this means a quarter, 0.25 of a cycle. So this is in cycles. So off 0.25. This is the function that's applied, which is, in this case, a bit crushing effect added on with this. And everything else to the right of the dollar is the final input, which is the pattern which is being manipulated. So that's kind of explain what each input is, but it doesn't say what it does. So let's have a listen, see if we can work it out. So here's the original. And here's this version with this function applied. So that's the original again. So you should be able to hear that the pattern stays the same underneath, but then on top of it, there's a version of it which is crushed in this case, so it sounds distorted, but it also sounds as if it's offset by a quarter of a cycle, and that is this number here. So off takes a pattern, plays it as normal, but then on top plays a version of it, in this case a distorted version shifted by a quarter. So what in the result of this is kind of that you have this pattern and a version of itself following it in time, transformed in some way. So that's what it is. If I add an extra thing. It's almost like a kind of echo or something, but the echo is bit crushed. So there's other things you can put in here. So here's the same thing that's going on, but instead of being distorted, I'm just adding 7 to the N note. Remember that for synths, N is the same as note. It just picks the note number that's being played. So that will work as well. So now, instead of being bit crushed, it's just going up 7 notes, which I believe is called a fifth. And that means it sounds like the tune has a kind of extra layer of itself that's following itself but above. That makes sense. Let's change this to an eighth, so 0.125. And let's add some more notes. So it's like the melody has the same kind of journey, do, 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 but there's this kind of stepping up and down following it. And that's the canon, I understand. Students of music might be able to explain this a bit better than me. So watch out on the forums for that. So there we go. So this gets a bit like an eighth described as 0.125 is a bit difficult, especially when it comes, if you wanted to do a 16th, that would be even more hard to remember. I think it's a 16th would be 0.0625. But what you can do instead, there's shorthands available. This is something quite new to Tidal, so it's not super well documented, but you can just put S for 16th, Q for quarter, E for eighth, T for third, F for fifth. Actually, there's a list of them down here. That's all the ones that are currently available. And so that's really useful. So here, yeah, just makes it a bit easier and quicker to specify those really quite common sort of divisions that we do. And if you want to do 2/5, you just put the multiple before the shorthand. So that would be 2/5, and that would be a 32nd, which isn't in the list, but you can do it by doing a half, 0.5, then an S for 16th. So that's half a 16th, which is a 32nd. So that's a bit of a sort of side thing, but it's something that's super useful when specifying fractions of a cycle. So I thought it'd be useful to take that in now, because it's super useful for off. Okay, so we've got this kind of thing going on. What happens if we have a more complicated melody to start with? Well, the answer is that it's really good, because you get all these nice overlapping things, and if the notes go together well, then you get really interesting effects. So what I've done is taken this, made it more complicated with some Euclidean syntax. I'm just doubling the density of this. But then slowing down the whole pattern so it lasts 2 cycles. And then with this off, so I'm taking that, leaving it as it is, but then on top having a version of it shifted in time by an eighth, and also going up 7 notes so that this sounds good. But the thing with synthesizers is that, and this is particularly a problem with super mandolin, because it's quite a short sound anyway, is that they by default fit the gap, the step that they're in. And this is like an 8-step sequence with 3 notes in, so these notes are getting really short. That would be like a 16th of a cycle for each note. But you can change that. So by default, legato is 1. And if you double that, or quadruple it, starts lasting longer. Or another thing you can do is just put the sustain in seconds. So that's 1 second sustain, so that lasts nice and long. And it goes through that here. Sustain and legato. Okay, so now we've got this. So how about, if you put sustain in seconds, that means that all notes are that length, which you might like, or you might prefer legato, because then that's the relative duration. So there's still kind of different lengths depending on the step width, step duration, but you're just making them all proportionally longer. Whereas with sustain, that means that every note is 3/4 of a second. and that means that it might feel less expressive, but it might be what you want. So just experiment, see what fits with you. So this is the same, but I'm also patterning the number of notes it's going up, or in the case of this, going down, because I'll put as a negative number. Yeah. So that sounds nice, because it's this has got this last 3 cycles, this pattern, and this one lasts 2 cycles. So because they're interfering with each other, it creates a pattern that repeats every 6 cycles, 3 times 2. Or is it to do the? Yeah, it's not a plain multiple. It's to do with the lowest common multiple or something like that. But anyway, it sounds good. So there we go. So we can add more stuff to this. So now on top of that, I've just added something which is off by a 16th and goes down an octave. And there's a note here that if you put a negative number here, you have to put it in parenthesis. So this would be an error if not. It's because it's ambiguous, this minus thing. It thinks you're trying to subtract 12 from n instead of just making an n that is minus 12. So to be clear to Haskell and therefore Tidal, you have to put negative numbers in brackets. Super mandolin's super quiet, isn't it? We should increase the default volume of that. So there we go. Another thing you can do instead of doing the brackets thing is put it in double quotes, which basically turns it into mininotation. It's just an alternative to putting it in brackets, except I've still got a bracket there. Okay. So that says that, and you can also have a lot of fun using off with things other than melodies. So this is an example with a drum pattern. So let's hear the original. So if I have an off by a pattern, so actually I'm patterning the offset and make those super distorted with squiz. I think I have to use Jux Rev here, sorry. There's nothing stopping you from manipulating time inside this, so I could do off by S and do our function of the week, which is iter. So there's a version of the pattern which is shifting in time, but also offset from the original. Create an interesting effect. Okay, so that's that. And I think that is all. So enjoy playing with off and see you on the forums. Thank you.